Awesome. Okay, looks like we're live. We've got an awesome panel today, all highly intelligent young Earth creation brothers. We've got John here, Sal, Neff, Praise. So I think Tony might be joining as well. Maybe Matt, I'm not too sure, but the links have been sent out. This is just the after show for the debate I just had with YouTuber Kakarot, goes by David. So if David's listening, shout out. Really good, respectful discussion. I enjoyed it thoroughly. So we're just here to hopefully do our best in reaching those and bringing them to Christ and ultimately, obviously, the gospel. So I talked a lot during the debate. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hand it off to these gentlemen. Thanks for joining me here in the after show. Yeah, take it away, guys. Whatever you want to talk about.
I'd like to point out one thing about diversity. Diversification of living systems. He asked you an intelligent question, which was, well, he made a point that he just didn't see how it's plausible that so much variety in the original created kinds could come about in the 4,300 years since the flood. But I think one of the things that explains that is that since we know the genome is decaying, especially after the flood, because of the changes to the Earth's environment caused by the flood, which would have induced a genetic damage to the genome of living things, as evidenced by the fossil record showing that living things grew to enormous size in the antediluvian world prior to the flood. It's also likely, I think, that the decay of the genomes of living systems has reduced the ability of organisms to produce variety since that time, probably at an accelerated rate. So it seems plausible to me that organisms would have been able to produce much greater variety in the first 1,500, 2,000 years after the flood than today. So this partially, I think, at least explains why his curiosity about that, because as the genome of a living system decays, it's likely that its ability to diversify is going to be also negatively affected by the accumulation of mutations. So I think that's a partial explanation.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely 100% right. Yeah, it makes sense that, especially after the flood, due to the environmental conditions, environmental changes, you're right, there would have been some rapid speciation there. And I believe that, like you said, it has slowed down since the initial creation event, and I tried to explain that right now, I mean, you can look at the mutations that have accumulated now since creation, take that mutation accumulation back to a point of least mutation accumulation, that's a point of creation, a point of perfection, perfect genome. So I think you're absolutely right. And even if you look at the numbers, I try to point out like the number of bird species we have today, the number of snake species, lizard species. I mean, you can name it. You can kind of look at you can do the calculations yourself. And it's funny because even the numbers fit better with a young Earth creation model. We've got like between 10 and 12,000 bird species, I pointed out, which is really only between 2 and 3 new species per year since the flood. And if evolution, deep time evolution was true, and I asked them this question, I've asked many people this question, birds supposedly evolved from dinosaurs, theropod dinosaurs, 65 million years ago. 65 million years of speciation, but yet all we have is between 10 and 12,000 bird species today. So their answer is always, well, there must have been a lot of extinction events. Well, that's a lot of extinction because those numbers fit way better, I think, with our model.
Right. Another important point that I'd like to make is that the evolutionists love to say that the mutation accumulation and well, they deny genetic entropy, of course, and we know why that is. But the fact that organisms today seem less diversified than ones that lived in the past is not only because of the accumulation of mutation, but change to the environment, caused by the flood. I think that's an important thing. But they talk about mutation rates a lot. They're in denial of the evidence that shows that the rate of mutations is too slow for evolution, but too high for organisms to have lived for hundreds of millions of years. And that's something that they just can't get on board with. So they posit, because of the evidence shows that mutation rate is there is a rapid accumulation of random damage events to the genomes of living things. They have to posit this crazy idea that there was somehow a much slower mutation rate in the past, and somehow it's experienced a sort of genetic punctuated equilibrium where it's exploded. And genetic information shows from studies have shown that the majority of single nucleotide variations in man's protein coding genes have arisen on the majority of them in the last 5 to 10,000 years, right? So that doesn't fit with the evolution story. All of a sudden, the mutation rate explodes for the man to become the diversified tribes that he is today. But that doesn't fit the evolution story. But here's what's implausible about there being a much, much slower rate of mutation to man's genome over all this imagined millions of years, or hundreds of thousands, at least for man, and millions for everything else, years, is this. The majority of genetic mutations are caused by duplication errors when the DNA molecule is duplicated in the cell. Salvador can probably tell us more about that than anybody here. And if that's so, then it's not plausible to believe that, since that's true, how could it be that there would be a vastly significantly less, slower mutation rate in the distant past? It doesn't make sense. If such a large percentage of mutations are caused by duplication events of the DNA molecule, which is something that's been going on always in all species and every cell. So their idea doesn't fit science, this idea that mutation rates were once much, much slower throughout these millions of years, and now all of a sudden so much faster. Salvador, maybe you could comment on that, because you probably know more about that than anybody here.
Actually, on this topic, you guys are actually more knowledgeable than I, so I'm just sitting back and learning. I know that may seem surprising, but because Dr. Sanford has so many people working on the genetic side, I'm the lone guy working on the protein side.
Oh, okay. Well, are you familiar with the? Have you read that paper that what is it? 86% or something to that effect of the single nucleotide variants in man's protein codes have arisen in the last 5 to 10,000 years. That's astonishing. What the evolutionists? How do the evolutionists deal with this? All they can do is just kind of look the other way. Really, there's no answer. Yeah. They don't have any answer.
No,
that's all they can do.
I'll tell you, it's one of the problems is it's hard to generalize what kind of what the mutations rates are, because they're different kinds, like mutations involving what they call transversions and transitions, which are point mutations, and then they have insertions and deletions, and then a whole bunch of huge, like big segments moving. And so it's really hard to put numbers on it. And then when I've seen the evolutionary literature, they have just widely varying numbers, and they can't agree among themselves. So, and then we add to that, there's a lot of biochemical stuff and biophysics stuff we really don't understand. So I'm sorry, I can't really, I'm not really giving you good answers.
Yeah,
I'm just.
That's cool. Let me screen share this image, Praise.
What the rates are.
Let me screen share this image for while we talk, just for a couple of minutes, so everybody can read this, and then I'll take it off while you guys are talking, just so people can see what it is I'm talking about.
Yeah, this that right there is a line of evidence they can't deal with. That's an amazing line of evidence. The linkage block one that I bring up too, I think, is in line with that. The fact that when you look at the modern human population, we know our genomes are broken up into these linkage blocks of limited size, ranging from blocks of like 10,000 to even several million nucleotides. And this is consistent with the biblical model, because there's only been like what, 150 to 200 generations since Adam and Eve. So recombination and gene conversion has only been going on for that many generations. But from the evolutionary perspective, gene conversion and recombination has been going on for hundreds of thousands to millions of years. So these linkage blocks should be scrambled to randomness, and yet they're not. And you could see this in the HapMap data. Robert Carter has looked at this probably the most extensively I've ever seen anyone look at it. But that's just another line of evidence that the genome is young. And what's funny is you said, Neff, that, yeah, they have to assume that mutation rates, like in the mitochondria, for example, were like 10 to 20 times slower in the past. So they'll accuse creationists of not doing science, or when it comes to the flood model, right, we don't assume constancy of rates when it comes to decay. And they criticize us for that. But yet when it comes to these mutation rates, all we're doing is using the empirical method, the observed mutation rate. We're saying, wow, mutation accumulation in the mitochondrial DNA only goes back 6,000 years. Now they're the ones that are invoking, different mutation, and not just like slightly different mutation rates, like mutation rates, like you said, Neff, 10 to 20 times slower in the past, just to calibrate it with their assumed deep time evolution of humans. So it's like we're the ones doing the science. I find now in 2020, the evolutionists are on the defense now. We're coming at them with all this evidence, and there's nothing they can say. They just have to, like you said, they just have to turn a blind eye to it,
That was an awesome
they also have
citation.
to-
I was not aware of that. Nephilim free. Thank you. That's what
you're
ends
welcome.
up
I've
happening
got
when
a couple
we
more. I've got a couple more similar to that. In fact, if Praise will let me, I'll screen share a few of them.
Yes, do it, Neff.
While we talk, and then we can see them, and I'll take them off the screen.
Well, Neff, you were saying earlier that everything was bigger, better in the past, and you've had some in your last debate. I think it was with Daniel. You had some photos up of like a beaver, just massive beaver, and just all these photos just showing like that in the fossil record, how much more diverse life was. Not to put you on I don't know if you got the pictures with you right now, but I found those photos fascinating. I mean,
yeah, that was a giant. It was an artist was reproducing an example of what a gigantic beaver that was found, the fossil evidence for a gigantic beaver, and to put this model in a museum of natural history. The thing that irks me about the way evolutionists treat these things is that they won't admit typically that it was actually a beaver. That takes them 10 years to get around to doing that. What they'll do is they'll say beaver-like. Gee, how remarkably beaver-like this creature was. And
right.
because they've been telling people for decades that beavers didn't live at the time when they found it, like they didn't coexist with dinosaurs. And then they find out they did. And so instead of admit that their theory, what they've been telling everybody is wrong for 90 years, 150 years, they'll say, oh, well, it wasn't really a beaver, but it was sure, she was becoming a beaver. It was beaver-like. And they do this over and over and over and over, and it just really gets under my skin. Why don't they can't just come right out and say, oh, well, look, beavers coexisted with dinosaurs. We didn't believe that, but now we've got the evidence for that. Because that's like telling everybody that they've been telling this story to for all this time, we were wrong again. They don't want to do that.
No, they can't. It's like those bird trackways, because he was talking about Archaeopteryx and theropod dinosaur to bird evolution. Yeah, no problem. Hey,
Sounds like
Tony, we
he's
love having you here, brother. You've always got great points. Tony's an evolution destroyer too, man. Well, he's an abiogenesis destroyer.
He's got a fucking hyena as a pet.
Hang on. What was that, Doug? Hang on.
Harley Quinn.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Sal?
I can hear you.
I just wanted to ask.
He's mad, man. What's the name again, Doug?
Harley Quinn, the emancipation of Harley Quinn, Birds of Prey.
Are you familiar with the
Harley chick, where's the-
is Jack Shostak? Any of Jack Shostak's experiments, Sal?
We have audio again.
Shostak,
Yeah,
the problem
we got
with
audio.
Shostak's experiment on the micelles and the lipid bilayers.
Yeah,
We're-
and some of the stuff he's done on protocells.
Well,
I'm getting off topic, if that's all right.
Well, we're offline anyway. No one can hear us.
Sorry, I
Well,
was
that's just
talking to
total
my friend.
garbage. Because if we don't have transmembrane proteins, actually, I'm working on a presentation to talk about them and protein probabilities. Basically, a layer without transmembrane proteins is like a coffin. So you can put all these biological materials in it and just seal it up. It's gonna die. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. This is like basic cell biology, like cell biology 101, in that they're advertising this as something legitimate. It's just, it's not honest. It's disgusting.
What exactly do they insert into these membranes? Because I was debating T-jump for a little bit. And that's something, the atheists will bring up. Well, we're doing all this stuff in the lab and we got all these membranes that are just, forming. What would you say to that?
If we shut down all the transmembrane proteins in a cell, you die. I mean, you may not even live very long. And I just think that's just not right. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as saying these guys are lying, but they're lying. If they're lying to themselves, because
Why don't they?
Like biology. This is like essential biology 101.
I agree.
In fact, we treat a lot of people that have problems with their transmembrane proteins. So the transmembrane proteins let materials go in and out of the cell in a very special way. I mean, we have a protein that it's a channel. It's basically like it's like a tunnel, and it only lets it has to be just the right size to let, like, say, a potassium atom go through. Anything bigger won't go through. And then it has all these filtering mechanisms that'll prevent stuff that's even smaller. So you only get the right ion getting through, and then it's also controlled. That little channel will shut down when it needs to. So it only lets so much in, and it only lets the right amount. And there are thousands of those on a cell surface. And in a human being, each of the cells, especially nerve cells, has thousands of these, maybe tens of thousands, and they have to be all coordinated. So to have this Jack Shostak saying, oh, well, we had a lipid bilayer that can encase something, it's like, well, a coffin can encase something. That's not really very good,
Yeah, I'd be curious to how he's engineering this, though, because they're never honest about the conditions that they use. Would you agree?
Oh, they're honest about their conditions, but the thing that's not honest is they'll represent it. They'll tell the truth as far as what
they
their
misrepresent it.
was. I'm sorry. Are we online
They
yet?
just use. Oh no, sorry. I was just saying that they used to use pieces of it. I see them do it all the time.
Yeah, we're back, guys.
Yeah, we've been back. I think for a couple of minutes we're good. Neff, were you screen sharing something for us, brother?
Use bits and pieces of the truth.
Yeah, I was sharing something. I just wanted to show a couple of quick citations for people watching this later can stop the video and read them. They're interesting about protein evolution and mutations, problems with that idea.
Sal, you were saying that
I was just saying thanks to Praise for getting us back online.
Yeah, thanks, Praise.
We can actually, I'm hoping to give a talk on that that talks about protein probabilities and these transmembrane proteins, because now we actually understand the probabilities better. And
yeah, sorry.
So I was saying these guys report their experiments accurately, but then at the end they'll say this shows that it could evolve naturally. That's what's false, and that's what the science writers will just grab on and start deceiving the rest of the public. So that's the part that's not honest, because anyone that really knows, not anyone that really knows cell biology, even a freshman or a sophomore studying cell biology should know that that's garbage. But because they hear professors and Nobel Prize winners saying that, they respect the authority, even though if people were just thinking it through, like say James Tour or even Change Tan or these other people, they'll say that's just garbage. It's garbage.
The RNA on clay, I know that's been discussed a lot. The atheists talk about it a lot. James Tour was saying that the clay is chemically prepared and stabilized. I don't know if you read up on that.
No, but there are problems with it. I don't want to take away from Nephilim Free, but
yeah, sorry, Neff.
Yeah.
Oh no, I was done sharing that. I'll say this about what you said, Sal. I find that humorous. I laugh about it all the time. I'll read a science paper and they'll say, "Oh, in this experiment, we observed that mutation to the such and such of the specific species, blah blah blah, and the effect was, that it did this negative effect and it did this negative thing, and that's how evolution works." I mean, what? I mean, that's the thing that kills me. They'll admit that what they observed actually happened to the organism was a negative effect in the paper, and then turn around and say in the very next paragraph or at the bottom of that very same paragraph that this is the mechanism of evolution and what made that thing that got damaged by the mutation come into existence. I mean, that makes as much sense as walking up to a car with a sledgehammer and smashing the windshield and saying, "See how you build a car?"
Yeah. Just reorganizing the molecules.
You get rich that way.
I'm just causing a few mutations in the windscreen.
Well, it's so funny because that's all they can give mutation-wise is just mutations that are deleterious, mutations that are reductive. But like Neff said, they'll say it right in their paper. This is what drove our fish to fishermen. Or to prepare for my RJ Downer debate, I read a bunch of papers on ALUs, and it just goes on and on about like the incredible functions associated with the ALUs. Well, and then it just throws it in there randomly, like, this is all because of the process of evolution. They just assert it, with no real actual evidence. Or they'll just say these functions discovered in the endogenous retroviruses, they've been co-opted, or but it's just all inference based. I find it amazing.
And I think the Lord sort of through the Apostle Paul prophesied why this is all happening, because for the longest time it was the people who weren't scientists that were believing the truth. And it says in 1 Corinthians 1:26, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards, not many powerful, not many of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even the things that are not, to bring to nothing the things that are." So,
amen.
So here are all these very bright scientists and just saying how stupid design is, and they're being proven wrong and being just throwing it to shame. Right. So it's that, it's that maybe uneducated grandma somewhere that was just trusting in God, the Creator, that had it right.
They're being proven wrong with their own secular papers. I wanted to read this. This is from an Evolution News article on, literally in the paper on these ALUs. It says, these jumping genes are considered as real motors of evolution. They just assert it. with no evidence. But I found the final paragraph. I couldn't say it better myself about these functions. So the article on Evolution News says, that's a clever rhetorical strategy. Call it evolutionary junk at first. Then when functions are found, call it a motor of evolution. No wonder evolution is a fact to Darwinians. They can't lose. If it's junk or treasure, Darwinian evolution made it. No matter what, it was evolution.
Yeah, they always seem to twist the narrative to, fit.
Oh, yeah.
Sal, do you come across many chemists that are skeptical of abiogenesis? Is there more and more chemists?
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you what's
All the
quietly
time.
happening. An entire department at, maybe I shouldn't identify that it's a secular university. And,
yeah, sure. Say it.
I better not. I don't want to get people. No, maybe I will, because actually, to come to think of it, this actually was this was a very public, this happened like about 10, 12 years ago at Virginia Commonwealth University.
Yeah.
So they had the chemistry faculty there, and then they had the biology and then the evolutionary biology guys. And a student there said, yeah, the chemistry faculty just really looked down on the evolutionary biologists.
Wow.
So, and that's not specifically abiogenesis. And then
I wonder why.
Yeah. And one of the faculty members was saying, we're not teaching enough evolution. And they kicked him out. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of the, that was really embarrassing. So back to Tony's question, are there chemists that are skeptical? And one thing I said last night, if you look at some of the top research teams that are making medical breakthroughs or pharmaceutical teams, you'll see lots of physicists, computer scientists, engineers, chemists. What you don't see are evolutionary biologists. So, I mean, and so like I would presume kind of the same thing for the abiogenesis guys. Like, what use do we have for people like that? Except that they're usually very fine chemists, but they extrapolate inappropriately, and they're just wasting their talents.
Even somebody like say Francis Collins, who's calls himself a Christian, but he has to squeeze in evolution somewhere. He doesn't, he's not giving that up. And
it's I try to give them. I try not to be too quick, because I was a Christian evolutionist for a while. I mean, I did. No one taught me. I learned science in public schools, and then I became a creationist. And I was an old Earth creationist for like 20, 30 years. And, and I was wanting to be converted to a Young Earth creationist, but it was hard. So we have people like Michael Behe, who's done so much for creationism, but he still accepts common descent. So I think the solution to this is, if the more evidence we have the fossil record is young and the Earth is young, there's just not going to be enough time for evolution. Common ancestry will be just thrown aside by people that are open.
If you don't mind me asking a question, do you believe Behe? Because I read his new book, Darwin Devolves, which is an awesome book. I'd recommend it. But do you think he's starting to have doubts though about even the common descent? Because it kind of sounds he's almost, it seems to be implying it.
He's always had doubts, and he says, he said, if it's false, it's false. If it's true, it's true. That's not his focus. So he's always had doubts, but that's not his focus. And I can understand that. He actually said very nice things about Dr. Sanford's book, Genetic Entropy. So he's aware of all these problems.
Right.
It's
because I find that book really, go ahead.
I was about to say, you'll see the same thing with Michael Denton. So Michael Denton used to be an old Earth creationist in high school. He began to see the nested hierarchies in biology, and he became an atheist. But then he studied evolution more, and he saw all the problems, and he said nested hierarchies are actually now evidence against evolution. And he found... So he wrote the famous book, Evolution, a Theory in Crisis. So he went from Christian to atheist to agnostic. So Michael Behe kind of is in a similar mold. They're probably not that enthusiastic about whether common descent's true or not. They're very fascinated by design. And that's the sort of people that I really try to reach out to, because they believe in intelligent design, but they're having a hard time with common descent.
Right.
And I've been there. So, I mean, Dr. Sanford was there. Lots of people were there. Because I see it in the gene browsers. You see what looks almost like transitionals. And I've been having to wrestle through that. So, yes, Michael Behe would probably be a creationist, but I'd say he's a creationist in process.
Right. And I have a lot of respect for him. And I can tell just reading Darwin Devolves that he has great respect for Dr. Sanford's work, because, well, actually, I'm screen sharing a quote from that book, but I don't know if you guys can see it. Praise would have to do it. And I think literally in just this one quote from Behe, I feel like he just sums it all up perfectly, because he says Darwinian evolution proceeds mainly by damaging or breaking genes, which counterintuitively sometimes help survival. In other words, the mechanism is powerfully devolutionary. It promotes the rapid loss of genetic information. Laboratory experiments, field research, and theoretical studies all forcefully indicate that, as a result, random mutation and natural selection make evolution self-limiting. Darwin's mechanism works chiefly by squandering genetic information for short-term gain. Like that literally, it sounds just like Dr. John Sanford's thesis as well in genetic entropy. So just looking at that makes me think that Dr. Behe himself must be realizing that, I mean, how are you going to take your single-celled ancestor into whales and all the life we see today by, as he says, just losing information, breaking things down, you know?
Well, that's actually the book project that Dr. Sanford commissioned me to, because we want to reach out to people like Dr. Behe, you know, because we consider them on our side, basically. You know, we have the disagreement over common descent, but we sort of see the same thing, is that if you look at biology, it does look like kind of like a stairway, where you have simple organisms, then more complex ones, and you can kind of build things up by steps. But the thing that Behe demonstrated was each of the steps would require a miracle. Right. So we've been thinking, well, why would God do this? Why would he make kind of this stair step approach? And I'm realizing it helps us to understand biology, because if we started off studying human eukaryotes, and that's the only organism we studied, like let's say humans were the only life on the planet, that'd be really hard to study. It's really easy that we have bacteria, we have yeast, we have fish, we have mice, we have chimpanzees, and we can kind of take them and dissect them and blow them apart and do all sorts of cruel experiments. And that's how we figure out we're fearfully and wonderfully made.
Right.
And we can even see like the bacteria, like we first started studying the flagellum, and we studied bacteria with only one flagellum. And now, thanks to you guys, I heard about the M01 bacteria. We wouldn't be able to understand that if we didn't have a simpler model. See, we can kind of appreciate as things are kind of built up in complexity. So the evolutionists say this complexity is built up over time. But if we have proof that the Earth is young, that I usually pose that to evolutionary biologists. I said, would you still hold to common descent? They don't want to answer, because they know. They know it will not hold up. If the fossil record's young, evolutionary theory is gone. And that would probably convert the people that are still holding on to common descent, because they know there's just not enough time, even in 1 million years. So, but
Sal, what up?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, somebody like Godless Engineer. Now, he commented, I think it was in a video, you know, he's going to take a bunch of chemicals and dump them in a test tube and mix them up, and he's going to get DNA somehow. You know, DNA is comparable to Diet Coke, I believe I heard him say, or something like that.
DNA is like Diet Coke.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, Diet Coke can't even form out in nature, so I don't know how he's ever going to get DNA.
Okay. I'll tell you one of the problems, and I only found this out. The people like James Downard, goodness, I can talk to other evolutionists. He's just one I cannot deal with. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. Sorry, I just turned red just thinking of him. Sorry about that.
He's a real pleasure. He's a real peach.
But he said, well, you creationists believe it's all or nothing model. And I'm just like, well, that's about right.
Yeah, James.
Because if you take a cell and you poke it and you let all its guts leak out, or you put a frog in a blender, it dies. I mean, it just doesn't reassemble. So what we found out is God made life with chemicals that have half-lives. So not only do radioactive materials have half-lives, chemicals have half-lives. So the genome's made of nucleobases, ACTG, which is adenine, cytosine, guanine, thymine. Each of these have different half-life. So let's say on the primordial Earth, you had all these nucleobases, adenine, cytosine, guanine, thymine, and uracil. Cytosine has a half-life of 19 days. 19 days.
Wow.
Thymine has a half-life of 56 years. So what does that mean? If you just have like even one half-life cycle of thymine, all the cytosine will be gone. So all your DNAs are going to be just spelled with a T. I mean, there won't be ACTG. And so when I hear this, I said, don't you numbskulls ever think through your own theories? I mean, just
No,
imagine you had a primordial Earth and you made these nucleotides. They're going to last, your cytosines are going to last 19 days. You're not going to be able to be making these RNAs on clays because the RNAs, like these ones that they're bragging about that were engineered by humans, were made with, they have to have some cytosines in them. And practically speaking, it's going to be gone. Not to mention, they don't really have, there are other problems that Dr. Tan pointed out. So that's my response to godless engineer. And that's probably why I wouldn't do good in debate, because these guys will just say stuff that's false. And I'm just like, I'm going to spend the next 2 hours just trying to clean up the cow pies they dropped in just 1 minute, because my job is like being a janitor, because there's just so many cow pies they keep dropping. I'm just like, goodness, I don't think I want to debate these guys.
It's really difficult because, like, for my style, I like to keep it one topic at a time. Because like you said, if you just let them talk for as long as they want, they bring up 5 to 10 topics and they're all lies. It's like, well, where do I start? There's so many different ways I can approach. So I often get accused of interrupting, but to be honest with you, I don't care. It's a debate. It's a war. And the second they make a point, like with RJ, right when the discussion started, he made a few comments on chromosome 2 fusion. Then he quickly tried to jump to something else. I said, no, stop right there. Don't slap it around, RJ. Let's talk about the points you just made on the chromosome 2 fusion. Where is that ape-specific satellite DNA that should be found around the reputed fusion site, for example? And then he didn't want to answer it. And so that's my style. Like, I will not let, and Neff knows too. I mean, you let these guys ramble on about 5 to 10 lies, well, you're only going to be able to pick one. So one topic at a time is my rule.
I wanted to say we're making a video. I and some guys that we'd like to share with your channel. It's only be 5 minutes long, and it's the title is Cow Pies. So we're going to tear apart one of the debates that Professor Dave gave. So we want to be family friendly, because you know what? I really want to say what they're saying. I said the only way to describe it is a cow pie.
Now, here's another thing that most evolutionists don't even like to try to wrap their mind around, is that the largest percentage of mutations that change the nucleotides in the DNA and swap it out with the wrong one, more often than not, it swaps whatever nucleotide there was there with thymine. Thymine gets replaced as the wrong base pair, wrong nucleotide, more often than any other nucleotide when a mutation puts the wrong one in place. So since that's true, then why in the world isn't there a disproportionately large number of thymine nucleotides in the genomes of all the living things in the world over millions and millions of years? There should be. It should be disproportional, but it's not. It's this wonderful proportions of ACG and T. So if evolution had been going on for millions and millions and millions and millions and millions, hundreds and millions of years, there should be a disproportionate amount of thymine base pairs in the DNA of certainly the higher kinds of living thing, like chimpanzees, elephants, human beings, the things that are existing, the larger, more advanced organisms on the earth today. But it's not so. Another thing you mentioned is you mentioned about abiogenesis and the absurdity of it. Another thing about that is this, that Dr. Robert Shapiro has pointed out in a science paper that there is no known chemical reaction in nature which produces ribose, the backbone of the DNA molecule, the sugar molecule of DNA. You need enzymes to be present just to make the sugar ribose backbone molecule onto which the DNA is built. So you have to have a cell to get DNA, because enzymes are proteins created by the cells itself. So abiogenesis, if Robert Shapiro is right about this, then you can't even have abiogenesis, because you can't get ribose, and you're not going to get DNA then without proteins already existing. Where do proteins come? They're made by the cell. So it's a chicken and egg problem, and just one more chicken and egg problem for the evolutionist. You can't actually get the DNA and now RNA either, because RNA is also based on ribose. So even RNA world hypothesis doesn't work if Robert Shapiro is right.
Well, that's why I'm kind of glad that Tony here really likes the abiogenesis argument, because it's actually a great way to actually understand the biological evolution argument. The reason is you begin to understand the parts of the cell and how they work, and then how difficult they would be to evolve even after the first life. But abiogenesis is just deadly. I actually do know some people who are ID proponents that believe in common descent, but they feel that the first life, the abiogenesis event, had to be a miracle. So even it's that powerful. So even people that a few of the people on our side that are ID proponents, one of them that comes to mind is Mike Jean. That's his pseudonym. He cites that as evidence of God, even though he accepts common descent. He said that first abiogenesis event had to be a miracle.
Sal, every atheist I debate always brings up the Miller experiment. That was a colossal. I know. Yeah, we can all laugh at that now. I mean, all of them. T-Jump.
Sorry.
Yeah, T-Jump, Snake. Even Aaron Ra talks about, the Miller experiment, and this experiment is such a disaster. Yeah, it's laughable.
I mean, it's like,
it is laughable.
It's like comparing. It's like taking a car from 1953 and saying, "Look at the most advanced automobile in the world."
That's actually a good way to put it.
Recycled cow pies.
Yeah.
For the first thing is actually my undergrad alma mater had two premier origin of life researchers, Robert Hazen and Harold Morowitz. And Robert Hazen was saying, Stan Miller actually held back the abiogenesis research, whatever that means, because he was so committed to his model that everyone else could see wasn't even right. So it's pretty bad when abiogenesis researchers themselves say Uri Miller was bad.
Yeah.
So one of the first problems is it required an ammonia atmosphere, and hardly anyone believes that that's even feasible, because ammonia is taking nitrogen and merging it with hydrogen. We actually need what they call the Haber process to make fertilizer. It makes ammonia first, and they have to take the materials up to like 500 degrees Celsius, and it's just very difficult. And the only way we get nitrogen or ammonia like substances in our biosphere is because of bacteria. They call it nitrogen fixing bacteria. So not only that, UV light will destroy the ammonia. So go on.
If you said that to somebody like RJ or Snake, they would just say, "Oh, Sal, you're wrong. You're a creationist. We don't care about your opinion." And he does this to Standing too. When Standing will come out with all these sources, but it's not from an atheist scientist. Automatically, they're going to reject your source.
Yeah, that's why I'm reluctant. I wouldn't mind trying to debate a little bit because I need to promote my upcoming book, but I don't know that I could deal well with just people just flat out sticking to points that are falsifiable. I mean, like,
Yeah,
I'll
complete
just be
idiots,
spending all
in
my
other
time
words.
shoveling.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's garbage.
It'd be good if you got a
Exactly.
vegetable garden.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's funny you bring that up. It's funny you bring that up there, Tony, because well, I'm screen sharing again. But yeah, so someone like James Downer, well, they're all like this, you know. Oh, these are all creationist sources, and it's like I'm screen sharing here. I've got like 20 papers. These are the papers I brought to the debate with him, and as you can see, all creationist sources. Intronic ALUs influence alternative splicing. Sal, I believe you love that paper. Even the papers for mitochondrial Eve, all like right here, for example, the Parsons paper.
I guess we have to have somebody.
Yeah, like these are secular papers, and they just, it's not good enough for them, is the point.
Right.
We need somebody to fix this for us somehow because we can't screen share unless Praise does something. He's not here. Is that right?
Oh, Praise isn't here right now?
Yeah, so screen sharing doesn't work somehow.
So you can't see it. Yeah, so the point is, and that's great with this too. I mean, we always bring secular sources, especially it's so easy because when we're getting into DNA function of introns or we're talking about protein moonlighting or ALUs, ERVs, we're getting this, or the third position codon function. You know, we're not getting this from creation sources. These are all secular based sources.
Oh yeah.
And we'll admit that these evolutionists, you know, that are writing these papers, yeah, they're coming up with rescue devices, ways to explain away the obvious conclusion through, of course, co-option or just evolution did this. So we're using their own papers to refute them. I think it's hilarious.
I love doing that. In fact, I don't mind sharing with the evolutionists, creationists paper. The only problem I have with doing that a lot is because the evolutionist then says, "Oh, these creationist scientists, you know, they're wrong. They're buffoons. They mess up their work. They contaminate their samples, etc." We've heard it all, right? But when you quote predominantly their own camp's papers to them and show the problems that they encounter in their science for evolution theory, they've got nowhere to go except to say you're misinterpreting the data. See?
Yeah, now,
But at least it's going to hit them in the head like a ball peen hammer that this problem with evolution that's coming up is coming from their own camp. So I love to use, that's why I predominantly use secular sources when I quote things predominantly with them, because they can't argue at that point that it's a dumb creationist scientist who's doing bad work, you know.
Neff, you were absolutely right about Shapiro. Shapiro was at a conference with Craig Venter. So everything you said about Shapiro was accurate with the RNA world and the chicken and egg problem. Just before he passed away, there's a video on YouTube on it where he was actually talking to Craig Venter, and Craig Venter had no answers to all the RNA problems that Shapiro was bringing up. So you're definitely accurate about that.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that is Robert Shapiro was one of the world's eminent biologists. You know, when Robert Shapiro wrote a paper, everybody in biology wanted to read it.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah. So when you bring up an expert, somebody like Shapiro, and I talked about that with Snake a little bit, who's been an expert in the field for 30-something years. What was his answer? Well, he's going to find some other scientists that disagree. So you bring up these experts, and like Standing said, it's just not good enough.
Right. It'll never be good enough for them. I mean, even here, look at this. The Ventura paper, the famous Ventura paper, like this is a secular source. And it literally, chimpanzee and gorilla chromosomes differ from human chromosomes by the presence of large blocks of subterminal heterochromatin thought to be composed. And it goes on and on about the ape-specific satellite DNA that should be found flanking the reputed fusion site if there really was one. This is actually a problem for the fusion and for the for just ape human common ancestry. So it's funny because, and I'm debating RJ Downer, and it's like, wow, evolutionists don't agree with you. It's like, this is a secular paper, but like Neff said, they're just going to say, well, your conclusion is wrong, because they're just going to blindly believe the explanation that's given in the papers. Like, for example, this one here, Parsons paper says, where is it? It literally says, using our empirical rate to calibrate the mtDNA molecular clock would result in an age of the mtDNA most recent common ancestor of only 6,500 years. Now, in the paper, in these pedigree-based study papers, yeah, they work their way around the date by calibrating it with the fossil record. So people like R.J. Downard are going to say, wow, I mean, did they agree with your conclusion? It's like, no, we're looking at the obvious conclusion based on the empirical data. And now, of course, the evolutionists themselves don't agree with it, but you can see the way they explain it away. It's all ad hoc, post hoc, inference, rescue devices. We're not interested in that.
I appreciate Tony sharing about Robert Shapiro, and really this is he actually did a lot to defend creationists on the scientific grounds, because he actually gave a favorable review to one of the founding books of the ID movement, Mystery of Life's Origin by Bradley Thaxton and Olson, which is still a great book. But this is what Robert Shapiro said. He said, "Some future day may yet arrive when all reasonable chemical experiments run to discover a probable origin of life have failed unequivocally. Further, new geological evidence may yet indicate a sudden appearance of life on the Earth. Finally, we may have explored the universe and found no trace of life or processes leading to life elsewhere. Some scientists might choose to turn to religion for an answer. Others, however, myself included, would attempt to sort out the surviving less probable scientific explanations in the hope of selecting one that was still more likely than the remainder." End
wow,
quote.
what an admission that is.
Heartbreaking, isn't it?
Oh,
So James
I'll tell
James
you why it's
Down.
heartbreaking. These guys did so much to make me a Christian, and it's really heartbreaking because they're honest enough that way, and that made me believe in God, and they just refuse.
Sal, what about Charles Thaxton and Dean Kenyon? They were other, I believe, biochemists that said similar things. I know they did turn to ID, but I don't know where they started out, if they were atheists or not.
I don't know. Dean Kenyon was a premier origin of life researcher, and he was the one who, when he studied the problem of how DNA got its sequences, he said it didn't look right, and he started to accept ID. It was because of a student of his that gave him a Young Earth Creationist book by A.E. Wilder Smith. He began to doubt his own theories. So he's honest enough with himself to say, this just isn't going to work. And so he was like one of those that said he turned to religion. And Robert Shapiro probably knew Dean Kenyon. So Dean Kenyon was probably one of the people Robert Shapiro was citing, that he said some scientists might choose to turn to religion for an answer.
When Richard Dawkins debated Wilder Smith back in 1986, he said after the debate that Wilder Smith was one of the toughest opponents that he ever, talked to. But then at the end, just like these internet atheists, he said, oh, well, he was misrepresenting the chemistry. Now, this is a guy that spent 30 years in a laboratory. And again, it's not good enough,
Oh, yeah. Not good enough. Well, I mean, it definitely comes from the heart. I mean, consider the statement by Thomas Nagel, the atheist philosopher, said in 1997. He said this about the creationism and the universe, about the evidence against cosmic evolution, actually. He said, "I want atheism to be true and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that." That's what Thomas Nagel said. I mean, it just cuts right. It verifies that the evolutionist atheist camp is interpreting all the data through their evolution paradigm, and not through an honest, objective examination of the data. Their paradigm that God didn't make anything is primary. and everything must fall under that, regardless of how strong the data is. They're just going to be a denialist until the day they fall dead, for many of them at least. And that's a very sad thing, as Sal pointed out.
Yeah. And one of the people that helped, I nearly left the Christian faith 20 years ago. And it's really kind of a sad thing in churches. They don't like to talk about things like what we're talking about. Some congregations think, well, we're going to offend people by bringing this stuff up. So, even if the pastor's sympathetic to it, they try to discourage discussion like this. So I nearly left the church 20 years ago, but it was Robert Jastro's book, who was a Big Bang advocate, his book, God and the Astronomers, that kind of kept me going. So that's not even a Young Earth Creation book, but I almost nearly left the faith, but because of his book, I stayed in it. And then I read Michael Denton's book, and he's an agnostic. And so that's why it's sad for me personally. When Jastrow died, I think I practically wept.
Sal, who was it that said?
Yeah.
Who was it that said something about cosmogony, and then mentioned it happens to be that I'm terribly paraphrasing it, something to the effect of the secular scientists are making discoveries that have led them to realize that once they've climbed the mountain to discover how these things work, they discovered there's a bunch of theists who were sitting at the top of the mountain the whole time.
That was Jastrow.
That was Jastrow.
Yeah,
that was Jastrow. And he was
talking about the Big Bang. Yeah.
So at least now we know the temperament of the people we're dealing with. And, some of them will be honest like Shapiro and say that we'll point out all the problems. And then there's some that aren't so honest with themselves,
Sal, the one debate I'd want to see, would be you against Aaron Ra. If you could somehow debate him, that would be the greatest debate ever, man, of all time.
I'd have to practice because I don't know how much, how many cow pies I could be shoveling fast enough, Because I did have an encounter with Aaron Ra.
Aaron Ra will never let you talk.
Yeah,
Aaron Ra's biggest
Aaron
thing.
Ra will never let you say a word, so you won't have to worry.
Yeah.
He'll just talk over the top.
All
you'll have to do is say 3 words, and Aaron Ra will just go over the top of you, and then you just sit there and don't say anything.
He carries on mostly about phylogenetics and about why the Bible was invented by sick minds. Those are his two beefs. That's pretty much all he has.
And you can take it as a compliment. If Aaron Ra starts talking over the top of you, it means you're intelligent. He only lets dumb people talk, people that don't make him look that bad. But anybody that's smart enough, he'll just start talking over the top. Oh, this is making me look bad. I better start talking. That's Aaron Ra.
I just noticed Shadow Dancer said, "Is it okay if Salvador answers my question?"
Yeah. Why doesn't she come up here and ask it? I can't hear you, Salvador. You're muted. You're muted. Salvador, you're muted.
Yeah. Sorry. Thanks.
Yeah. That's all
Thanks,
right.
Jason. I had an encounter with Aaron Ra. He didn't know who I was. And so I introduced myself and I said, I work for John Sanford. And because Aaron Ra was, ragging on creationists, I said, well, John Sanford's he's a Cornell professor and he invented the gene gun. And he's a creationist. He said, well, let me send you a PDF file, so you'll understand why evolution's true. The guy just has...
He just invented the gene gun, and he's a super genius. Well, he's an ex-car salesman. What do you expect? You can't expect.
That reminds me of James Tour. the world famous chemist who said he got in a discussion about evolution with somebody, Francis Collins. Yeah, and Francis Collins sent him a bunch of pictures of fish heads, saying this is why evolution is true. And James Stewart said that means nothing to a chemist. What are you talking
He's
about?
a used
Sending
car
me
salesman,
pictures
by the
of
way.
fish heads? I'm trying to talk to you about how life could possibly exist because of pure chemistry, and you're sending me pictures of fish heads.
You there, Neff?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
We having audio
no,
issues again?
no, I just.
Hang on, I was looking for Shouted Dancer's question. She sent a super chat, and thank you for the donation here. God bless you. It was great hanging out with you on the discussion on slavery. So her question is, Salvador, what do you think about this new area of science called molecular paleontology? Oh my goodness, I know nothing about it. I feel really bad. I know that there is Brian Thomas is doing something in biochemical paleontology, and I'm actually working a little bit with him on that. So if molecular paleontology deals with the work of Mary Schweitzer and all the soft tissue, I think that's very interesting, and that's what Brian Thomas is working with indirectly. And then I've had some work on it. So let me give. I could be totally answering the wrong question, but I'll just give what little I know and the work that I've been doing on it. And this actually relates to a little bit of origin of life. Remember, I said biological molecules have half-lives. And so this is really interesting because not only now can we use like carbon-14 to date things, we can, the chemical half-lives are maybe not as accurate, but they'll put an outer limit to how long something could be buried. And it also causes problems because if we collect collagen from fossils, like say at the top of the geological column, and we collect collagen at the bottom of the geological column, and they have about the same chemical state, that means they died about the same time. And so we're collecting more evidence of this. So we don't even need to date them at exactly when they are. If we could just establish that they died about the same time, that'd be pretty devastating to evolutionary theory in the fossil record. So so Brian Thomas's research is in collagen. Mine is I've not had enough time to spend on it, and maybe I could squeeze a week by. Some work was done by R.H. Brown and Michael Brown, who work with Loma Linda GRI, which is a Young Earth Creationist research outfit. They're Seventh-day Adventist. I don't have the same theology that they do. I'm evangelical. But anyway, they found out that the amino acids start to become in living things, they are all left-handed. But when an organism dies, they start to decay to be half left and half right. And it follows kind of like it follows a profile, kind of like a half-life profile. And I looked at this, and I could see that there was that invariance between the layers. They're all about the same age, and they didn't agree with the geological clocks. So we could end up having more than just the C14 clocks and all the other arguments on top of what Nephilim Free has been sharing. We would have really even more powerful arguments against evolutionary theory in addition to what we have. And that's what I think this is how we're going to break common descent, is if we can establish even more forcefully the fossil record's young. Even the evolutionary biologists say there's just not enough time. So that's what I know of. That's what little I know about molecular paleobiology.
Oh, that's cool.
Sounds like a field invented to try to prove evolution.
Yeah, but it ends up proving creation. As usual.
Well, they can only go so far back because stuff breaks down. Like Sal pointed out, biological molecules are very susceptible to decay in the environment. They just don't last long. You know, that's the job of every forensic scientist, is to look at how long, guess how long somebody's remains have been lying in the woods by what the chemical processes that have been destroying its flesh, the flesh. And so that doesn't take millions of years. You know, you're not going to get organic tissues to last millions of years. The best estimate they have for these things like collagen and proteins to exist is in permafrost. They think maybe 6 point something million years is the maximum amount of time that you could get proteins to survive in nature. That's absolute maximum they're talking about. That's the upper limit, 6 million years. And that's not nearly enough to fix the dinosaur soft tissue problem, which is 65 or more million years, 65 to 75, 85 million years. So that's not working too well for them. They're still scratching at the yellow pad with the pencil, trying to figure out how to solve this issue, and it's just not solvable. They can't solve it.
What's funny about how all this racemization dating, which is I'm working on, and I'm not gonna, I need to give credit to where it started, which is Michael and R.H. Brown, but it actually started with Jeffrey Bada, who's the student of Stanley Miller of the Urey Miller fame. Jeffrey Bada was starting to do all this racemization dating because they thought, oh, it'd be so good we could do this because it's going to be cheaper than carbon-14. But then when it started giving them results that they didn't want, when they're starting to see all the fossils look young, they abandoned it. They had all the instruments telling them what the real dates were, and they couldn't accept it. So they said that the method must be wrong.
Oh, wow.
Sal, I just had a question. The racemic mixtures of amino acids, how they're in a stereo scrambled configuration. You were saying that they constantly keep flipping. So even if they could produce all left-handed varieties, it would be in a way that would have to be done under very controlled conditions, because they would keep turning and bonding in the wrong stereo scrambled mess.
Not just even under controlled conditions, it'll racemize.
Right.
Because even if you put the amino acids, oh, by the way, just want to acknowledge Shadow Dancer. Thanks again for the super chat, and she has a great article on molecular paleontology. So I'm sorry if I totally botched, but she thought I was going to answer. But back to Tony's observation on on the controlled conditions. What do we mean by controlled conditions? If you throw them into a beaker and just put them at modestly cold temperatures, even freezing, it's still going to racemize. So even when you control it, it has a half-life. So how come life doesn't have that problem? Well, it keeps recreating all the pieces of, when a protein starts to degrade, it's going to get replaced. So it's just like when you're replacing your tires, you put on a new one. You don't necessarily try to just repair it piecemeal. You just start from scratch. So all these proteins in a human being, a lot of them try to get recycled. And unfortunately, some things don't get recycled. And that's partly, I think, why our brains start to decay a little bit. The proteins have just been there for too long. Sorry to give you the sad news. So even under controlled conditions, they'll spontaneously racemize. This is well known. Part of it is because when you have things at room temperature or close to it, the molecules are bumping against each other, and that's kind of like making them flip coins. So that causes what they call spontaneous isomerization, and so it just can't be stopped. And the only way to get it restarted is to kind of redo all the amino acids. You can't really pull one out and then flip it unless you have a living organism. And bacteria do that. They can grab a D amino acid, and they have to use lots of enzymes and spend some energy to convert it to the L form.
That's an excellent point, Sal. And it just demonstrates another ridiculous problem with the abiogenesis idea. How do you get a natural evolution of a system that is designed to maintain itself by constantly rebuilding itself? Not only in light of the environment continuously attempting to destroy it. So not only do you have to have the system evolve in the beginning, which is crazy, but now it's got to be a system designed to constantly replace its components because they're degrading. What ingeniousness this is, and the abiogenesis, the evolutionist just has to dismiss that and say, well, it could happen. I mean, that's all they can come up with is a faith statement. They have to go to their imaginary place of religious faith in evolution to believe this could even happen, much less did.
Yes. Well, it's when I look at the Old Testament and we see people just especially like the children of Israel who saw God work all the miracles as he delivered them from Egypt and liberated them, they would go and just grab something and build it and worship it. And just like how stupid is that? And that's almost the same temperament I'm seeing among some of the real diehards that they'll see that it's not feasible, but they're going to believe what they want to believe anyway. Just like that beautiful quote by Nagel that you gave. They're going to believe in it. And it's really something a little funny. I thought about what it is that they'll believe. Some of them will say, well, I want a scientific experiment to prove God. And I said, okay, so you'll believe in God if you can create an experiment and he'll show up when you want, how you want, and he'll do exactly what you want. Is that right? And they'll say, well, yeah. And I'll say, well, at that point, you're pretty much God yourself, So what you're saying is you'll only believe in something you totally understand and something you can totally control. And that means you'll only believe in God if you're God yourself. And, they don't really want to say that, but that's the logical conclusion.
Right.
Whereas people that believe in miracles, it's like Jesus said, you have to be like a little child to enter the kingdom of heaven. You have to be willing to entrust your life and your soul to something you'll never totally comprehend. And that's far greater than your...
It.
Yeah.
That's it, Sal. That's exactly right. It's they refuse to humble themselves before a creator. They don't want to acknowledge that they're a sinner, needs a savior. Their humanist pride stands in the way of their willingness to humble themselves before God and acknowledge his greatness and their own shortcomings. And that pride is such a remarkably powerful force in human beings that the heart of human being drives their mind. It pulls it around on a leash like a puppy dog. Their heart says something can't be true. It doesn't matter how empirical the evidence is. If their heart says it's not true, their mind is going to say, I'll find a solution to it somehow. I'm going to go along with this. So it is remarkable. And point out also, King David said, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Yeah.
I agree, Neff. And I've been leaving a few silly comments on some of the videos, but yeah, if they can't prove abiogenesis or God in the laboratory, they'll just push abiogenesis to some other universe on some other planet and say, well, hey, look, we don't have to prove it today, but hey, it still happened.
Right.
Well, the thing that comes to mind is this: you look at the Pharisees when Lazarus was raised from the dead by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Their reaction was, rather than worshiping Jesus and bowing to him, they wanted to kill both Jesus and Lazarus. So this is what, we're not dealing with anything very different from that, from some people. There are people in the middle, definitely, and probably a lot more well-meaning, but there's some people that are like the Pharisees. They will fight you tooth and nail and don't even expect a logical argument from them.
That's right. And it brings to light also another scripture that says, the human heart is deceitfully wicked, who can know it? is what the scriptures say. And when you have somebody who's provided a profound amount of empirical scientific evidence that life was in fact designed, and their heart says it can't be so, I don't want the universe to be like that, like Nagel said, then you're seeing an example of that. And what proves that the human heart is actually the most beautiful and yet most wicked thing, I think, that God has ever made. Not wicked and naturally wicked necessarily, but capable of such wickedness, is that their own heart is creating, is making it so that person is going to lose everything in the end. They lose paradise with their loving, merciful, forgiving creator, and they set themselves up against his justice, which is the ultimate loss. That's the ultimate loss. And they're willing to put themselves in that position because of their heart. So since their decision of their heart is capable of destroying, ruining the most valuable thing God has made that we know of, which is the human soul, then it exemplifies just how wrong and wicked it is for these people to say, I see no evidence of a designer. There is no God that made nothing. God made nothing. Nature is its own explanation. But then what really cinches it for me is for them to turn around and teach this to 10 and 12-year-old children. That is the real wickedness behind it, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. And that's the only reason I've been around the debates for a long time. And for 20 years, I don't know any opponent that got converted. Some of them are really nasty. I'm just like, yeah, I don't put much credence in that. But the reason that I engage them is for what you said, is to challenge them in front of the younger generation, the people that may be on the fence, that they could see that, we need to call people out like Jack Shostak, who has a Nobel Prize, and say, he may have done fine work, but what he's saying now is just terrible. It's unworthy of scientists of his reputation to be putting out some of the junk that he's putting out now. And
But
I'm really glad James Turk called him out on it.
Yeah. Why would nobody question him? And Lee Cronin is another one. He doesn't want to listen to our narrative. We're making a narrative, but so we have to listen to their narrative. I mean, of trying to design life without using design. It's crazy.
It makes as much sense as pointing to a robot that speaks English and can write and say there was no designer to that. And yet the robot is almost infinitely inferior and less designed than a human body.
So speaking of debate, I had a question for you guys. What is modern day debate? I'm really new to all this. So what is modern day debate?
He's a fellow who
totally biased.
Modern day debate is debate. Modern day debate is a YouTube channel where he hosts. James is the guy who owns the channel, and he hosts debates of all types on just about any subject, and tries to do it in an unbiased way. He's a
fails miserably.
He's a Christian, and
he's an old Earth Christian, but he's biased towards evolutionists.
He hosts debates very often on his channel.
Are there debate channels? There's a reason I'm asking for this. I mean, outside of standing for truth, I'd like to practice debating some of these people. I don't know that it really is a skill to be able to be to debate some of these people. So even if the fact's on your side, it doesn't mean you'll necessarily perform well in a short time frame.
You're dealing with arrogance and stubbornness and a lot of other things.
There are a couple of channels that host debates, but they don't really send out invitations to creationists. You'd have to contact them, probably get their email address from their YouTube web channel, and ask them if they'd invite you for a debate, I think. they debate. They're kind
Modern
of
day
biased
debate would
in
be
the
a
way
good
they
one for him to
debate.
start off on.
They set their rules and they debate what they want to. And a lot of these channels I've noticed, there aren't very many of them, but the ones that do, they love to pick on the uninformed creationists. They'll pick some guy who, got all fired up about it and decided he was going to debate somebody, but he really doesn't know almost anything about the subject much. He's very green, and they like to invite people like that because they can slaughter him in a debate because he doesn't know much anything. But they shy from inviting people like Standing for Truth, myself, other informed creationists, because then they got trouble. They don't want to do that.
So maybe we have to try to build up the channel a little more so we can get more people to listen.
Well, good luck with it. If we could.
I've challenged Aaron Ra myself a few times on the origin of life, and his answer was "F you."
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. F you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be Aaron Ra. Hey, Sharon, a Shadow Dancer's out there waiting to be added in, so I was just letting Praise know if he's listening, which he probably isn't. So
He's not even in the Hangout, the live stream anymore.
No,
I don't think we
he's
can.
out.
Well, let's
Yeah,
see.
he can hear us.
Okay, yeah, he has to be here in order for somebody to get it. We could send her the link and she could join, but she wouldn't be able to go live with us without his.
No, she's waiting out there, but he's got to add her. That's all.
Yeah, I think she's in the queue.
Is that an atheist?
Yeah, she's in the backstage.
No, a Shadow Dancer is a Christian.
Oh, okay.
Redefine living. Sorry.
Yeah, you'd have to ask her why she has that name. As a matter of fact, I got to ask her why she has that name. I've never asked.
So
if Praise lets her in, we can ask her.
Redefine living on the.
Yeah, go ahead, Sal. Jason. Go ahead,
please.
Oh, I was just acknowledging Redefine Living said, Salvador, you can probably debate here and have SFT moderate. So
yeah, so when it comes to debate channels, I would say, so James from Modern Day Debate, he's pretty well, like you can get 500 people sometimes if you have a really big name. Like I know anytime Hovind debates there, they get like 1,000 people watching. So he's probably got the most popular debate channel, one of the most popular right now. But he'll host any number of subjects like Neff said. Neff and I love to go on Modern Day Debate. I recommend Modern Day Debate, but Neff and I like to go on there because we'll go up against the evolutionists, and there's going to be a big crowd because you're always guaranteed to get thousands of views, sometimes 10,000 or so more. Like you said, Sal, yeah, we could get you on that channel, no problem. I've moderated there before. For our channel here, yeah, we'd love to grow it. But it'd be an honor to have you debate here too. I mean, we had you that one time with Snake. I'm more than happy to moderate. But yeah, your bigger debate channels, yeah, definitely Modern Day Debate and a few other biased ones like Neff was pointing out. A few other more biased ones like Neff pointed out where they don't really want informed creationists on.
No.
Those ones I'll usually go challenge them until they, have no choice but to get me on there, which I've done many times. Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. Steve McRae's channel, but Modern Day Debate at this point seems to be one of the more popular ones anyways. It's growing more and more. So.
Well, Shadow Dancer's just joined us.
I have. You guys can call me Jessie. Hi, Tony. I'm not an evolutionist.
Jessie, always a pleasure. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you. And sorry about that kind of it sounded kind of like a cryptid message. I didn't know if you knew about molecular paleontology. It's a brand new thing that's come up in about the past 5 to 6 years. So I didn't know how much you knew about it. Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh, my voice is giving out a little bit, so I just muted myself.
So I wanted, so one of my questions is that so I was reading this article and I linked it in the live chat, and they were talking about how there's a lot of controversy and bias against molecular paleontology because of the so-called temporal limit, and how people need to stop being biased against this because of this temporal limit. And I find this very interesting because I'm like, well, if the temporal limit was before they found DNA in dinosaur bones, and that means that that was a limit that they actually had in biology. But now they're actually trying to say that this temporal limit needs to be done away with because it's biased. And if you read the article, it's only 3 paragraphs. They actually talk about it and how we need to get past that, and in order to bring up the discipline of molecular biology. And I just found it kind of interesting.
Sounds like they're trying to shut down. It sounds like damage control, doesn't it?
Or trying to shut down biology. Like, biology cannot last that long. And yet they're saying that it can last 60, 70, even 90 million years.
Oh, I wasn't able to get it from the chat. Was it this one that said molecular paleontology is the study of ancient complex biomolecules associated with deep time fossils, which may provide important information for understanding the organism's evolution and fossilization process at the molecular level, as well as facilitating the recognition of preserved biomarkers in order to identify life on other planets. And then it talks about that limit in that same paper.
Yep, the temporal limit.
This study clearly shows that the search for ancient biomolecules should not be constrained by the so-called temporal limit. The assumptions that proteins cannot survive the fossil record beyond 1 million, 1 MA, and 100,000 years for DNA. The preservation mechanism of soft tissues and fossils is far more complex than we have observed in modern environments through Tefaminy experiments.
And what I really find interesting is if you go down to the second paragraph, they say another common critic plaguing discoveries of ancient biomolecules concerns the repeatability of the results. However, it is an obvious bias to declare that the result cannot be replicated if different techniques or methods are used. To me, that kind of sounds like that's very contradicting to science. Science should be repeatable.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's a double standard because evolutionists will say that their theory is fact, but they can't prove one way. If they're saying they can't prove one way or another that these molecular fossils are old or young, then the evolutionists at best would say, well, our theory is still also controversial. We don't know that it's fact or not. Right now, it's just a speculation, but they're never going to say that.
And that's not quite what they say. They kind of like beat around the bush in it. And I just thought about that. I was like, so you want science to actually prove your point, but yet science should be repeatable. And yet now you're saying that that's bias for science to be repeatable. And maybe I'm breaking it down to like a super generic level. But when I read that, I was like, what is wrong with these people? Oh, I know why. They've got blinders on, but they're literally saying that this is a bias about repeatable science. And I'm going, no, science should be repeatable.
Right. They don't want their science, their evolutionary science, to be limited to observable, testable, repeatable science. They want it to move it. This is an attempt to say the ideas in our imagination qualify as science, which is exactly how the evolutionist mind works anyway. So what they're saying is our philosophical ideas about what happened, what existed in the deep past, that doesn't exist for us to tangibly possess so that we can test, repeat, and fool with it with real observable science. That's just as valid as the testable, repeatable science. So that's why they're calling it about a bias, because they want to make it seem as though whatever it is that they believe that they can extrapolate and claim is true of evolution that exists at a time prior to any materials we have that we can test, that's just as valid science as the observable, testable, repeatable. So they're trying to do away with the limitation of saying you can't do testable, repeatable science on what's in my imagination. Whatever's up there, that's just as valid scientifically as what we can do in the laboratory. And that's wrong. That's how they violate science. And I've said it many times, evolutionists are anti-science in so many ways. That's just another beautiful example of it right there. They want to make what's in their imagination as valid as any testable, repeatable science so that you can't argue against what they're saying.
And do you mind if I read something else? I think you guys will find this really interesting. So they interviewed Dr. Mary Schweitzer through the National Geographic, and they wanted to check her find of this DNA, right? And you guys probably know this, but I'm just going to say it for the audience. The researchers applied a dye to the fossils that sticks to DNA and fluoresces red. Then they dyed the living emu cells and compared the two, meaning they had another comparison of a live sample compared to the dinosaur bones. This is her response. I am not even willing to call it DNA because I'm cautious. I don't want to overstate the results. There is something in these cells that is chemically consistent with and responds like DNA because it actually, what did they say? Although it was much fainter than the dye in the emu cells, the fossil's dye stuck to something. They don't even want to admit it. They're still trying to beat around the bush on it because they have to stay within at least 1% of the bounds of science. And that's the reason why I asked you, Salvador, if you'd heard about any of this, because it's quite an interesting field. I kind of actually attribute it to anthropology, because anthropology, literally, their entire basis is evolution.
Now, you're currently studying anthropology, aren't you?
History.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So I've taken a lot of anthropology classes, and it's funny how anthropology has actually started to kind of bleed into history. Kind of sad, in my opinion, because there is no history prior to human civilization. That's anthropology. And yet historians in my college is going into anthropology, and I'm going, but that's not history. They don't have anything to support it. They have conjecture. And that's the reason why I thought this molecular paleontology was really interesting. It's a lot like anthropology. All they have is conjecture.
Well, this is happening culturally on so many levels now, where facts are being criminalized. I mean, we could go into the cultural areas.
Yes.
And talk how we can't tell the truth anymore. It's criminalized. You can't tell the truth. Just like what happened in Wuhan. They told the doctor who discovered the coronavirus, they imprisoned him for supposedly spreading lies about the virus. And so they criminalized him trying to tell the truth and save lives. But this has become very pervasive throughout. It's kind of sad. It's starting, stuff like that's happening in the United States. You can't tell the truth. So this instance with the molecular paleontology and the quote unquote controversies surrounding it, I think it's a larger symptom of what's happening culturally. And it's sad. It's sad, but it is also very interesting because sometimes the facts start to get a little bit too uncomfortable, and what they have to do to suppress it.
Oh, absolutely. And I hear this in my classes, and you guys have probably heard this on one of the live streams before, but I took a class called 100,000 Years of War. And at first I was kind of excited until I realized how dumb the name of the title was. Like, oh, wow, I have to wait 94,000 years before we actually get to civilization, right? We spent 16 weeks talking about a gene. That's the warrior gene. It was terrible now.
Gosh.
And it was even funnier because they did a test on people that they think have this warrior gene, right? It came out with 60% actually have this violent tendency. Then they tested a non-gene population that doesn't have the gene, and they came with the same percentage. And they can't. This is the first 4 weeks of my class. I see you laughing, Salvador. It was hilarious. And they were trying to answer the question of war, of violence, interpersonal violence versus intrapersonal violence. And I'm sitting there in my class going, just read the Bible and read where Cain kills Abel. Like, it's really not that hard to figure out where violence comes from.
No, I have to ask. The reason I'm laughing is, how do you suffer through classes like this?
Very patiently, because I've been doing it for 3 years now, and my friends in my college have told me to keep my mouth shut because I've gotten a big target painted on my back. And I actually had one teacher, she tried to kick me out of my licensure at my college.
Wow.
And I actually filed an equal opportunity thing. And when I went to the guy and I told him, the basis of the conversation, basically, she asked us in the beginning of the class what we wanted to do with our degrees, real or imaginary. And I thought, well, okay, my imaginary, thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to work for the Institute for Creation and Research as a historian. So I said that. Well, she happened to be a prior biologist and had interviewed a biologist who came from ICR, and she was so mean to me for the rest of the semester. And so I filed a report against her. I'm talking about not just me, I'm talking about just blatantly disrespectful. And so I went to the EO guy and I told him the basis is that I think she did because I was a Christian and because I'm a creationist. You know what he did for 15 minutes? He told me, well, we have proof of evolution and all this kind of stuff. And basically you have no basis.
Wow.
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 And I was just like, well, where's my protection? Where's my protection for my religion whenever other people get protection, but, not Christians. Oh, no, not us.
And think about it. How does that relate to your education anyway? How does that prevent you from being a good student or learning the curriculum because you state what you'd like to do with your education? That has nothing to do with their job educating you. Right? Nothing.
Absolutely.
Not a thing. I mean, and so it just, that's terribly egregious penalty. I mean, a terribly egregious thing to do because it doesn't have anything to do, any bearing whatsoever on your ability to learn the curriculum or for her to teach it to you and for you to get your degree and whatnot. It's just anger. They want to punish you because they're angry that you're going to use your education for something that argues against their paradigm. It's so pathetic.
It was just to bully you, really. That's what they do.
Yes.
Just bully people.
Yes, Tony, you're absolutely right. Like I was in a physical geography class and we were actually going over evolution and deep time and all that kind of stuff. And then my professor, who's got a PhD in geology, just boldly stated, hey, we have proof of evolution because elephants in Africa are being born without tusks because they're being killed for their ivory. And I'm like, I raised my hand. I said, ma'am, how do they know that they're being killed for their ivory? She goes, oh, well, but they don't actually know. They just, it's an evolutionary thing. It's natural selection. And I said, well, that doesn't make any sense, though. I was like, they're actually losing information. And aren't they still elephants? She wouldn't answer my question. And the entire class jumped on me.
Yeah.
And after that, she actually did not answer my questions every time I would, even if I was trying not to contradict evolution, she would look over my raised hand.
If you watch Expelled with Ben Stein, they talk about many examples of that. A lot of PhD professors who are now ID proponents who have similar stories.
I knew one of them. Oh. Actually, I knew probably half the people in the movie. I actually got interviewed. I was actually filmed, but I didn't make the final cut for Expelled because I really didn't get expelled.
Yeah.
So, I was at George Mason University at the time, and this was in 2005. This is an amazing answer to prayer. There are two of us trying to start a intelligent design group at George Mason. And I prayed, Lord, can you give us national attention for what we're doing here? I don't know why God put that on my heart. And a few months later, or even weeks later, I got a letter from Casey Luskin, who was part of the Discovery Institute eventually. He said, there's a reporter from Nature that wants to talk to you. I'm just like, Nature? That's the #1 scientific journal. And so I had my first ID meeting, and the reporter was there, and then also Carolyn Crocker, who was a PhD professor of biology at George Mason. And 3 weeks after our story got out, she got fired by George Mason. And so she ended up in the movie Expelled. We got national attention. So she keeps saying, well, it's Salvador's fault I got fired because he prayed we'd get national attention. That's how God answered our prayer. His prayer.
Have you ever wondered what it'd be like for these evolutionist hard noses who mistreat creationists like this if the tables were turned? What if creation it became as valid in science as evolution and whatnot, and professors were to say, oh, just shut up, you're a stupid creationist, you're and this kind of thing, whatever it is that they do, and do the same thing to them. Now, I'm not advocating, of course, that creationists behave that way, and being Christians, they would not likely. So, but I mean, can you imagine the shock that they would feel? You're kidding me. You're kidding me. If the tables were turned on them, only then would they realize the egregiousness of their behavior. But it won't matter to them, because it wouldn't matter, because it's just the human heart speaking out. That's all.
They did this. They did this to Raymond Damanian, the inventor of the MRI. They actually denied him a Nobel Prize, but they gave a Nobel Prize to somebody like Jack Szostak, who's totally dishonest about the entire RNA world. But yeah, that just to what Neff was saying. Raymond Damanian, he was somebody that was ridiculed for many years, and he's one of the greatest creationist scientists of all time.
Yeah,
since like 1969, right?
Yeah.
Didn't he create it in 1968 or 1969 or something like that?
And he's been ridiculed ever since for being, a nincompoop and science denier and everything else. So he's one of the most brilliant guys in science.
I would recommend a book by Jerry Bergman called Slaughter of the Dissidents. You can see him give an explanation of the contents of his book in a YouTube video where he documents, after interviewing numerous academics who have been mistreated this way because they had inclinations of creation, or they were outspoken creationists. The list is very extensive, and he has documented numerous cases where academics have been either outright fired or demoted, and to belittle them on their jobs and had their careers taken away, whatnot, lots of times. So it's not... The evolutionist wants you to think, oh, well, okay, maybe that happened once. No. It's happened many times, and they don't want to believe that. But the funny thing is, when the evolutionist says, that's not true, there haven't been a lot of academics who've lost their jobs for saying they're inclined to believe creation or whatnot, that shows that we're not biased. That's like saying, well, we're not biased. It's because, something else, but we're not biased. But then when they talk to you exactly like you're just a stupid creationist. So the truth is, if they had the authority or the power over you to treat you that way, they do it themselves while pretending, oh, no such thing really happens. It's just the most ridiculous, hypocrisy.
To give you an idea of how nasty they are, Richard Smalley was the Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, I believe, in 96. He died of cancer, and he became a Christian towards the end of his life. He was a brilliant scientist for many years. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with him, but the atheist turned around and said, oh, he was dying of cancer, so he came to God. Yeah, he was a scientist, but he was a fool to become a Christian. So this is their attitude towards somebody that, had a change in heart. Even a brilliant PhD scientist and a Nobel Prize winner, they would still call a fool for becoming, a Christian.
Well, and they attack in so many different ways too. Like I was in an education class, and I had just, ever since I became a young Earth creationist, like I've always been a creationist, but I just always got confused about dinosaurs, evolution. I didn't know how it all worked until I found a book by ICR, and I have just felt this compelling need to make sure that I'm not classified with everybody else. I don't want to be an echo chamber, and I don't want to be in a confirmation bias. So in the beginning of this class, this was technically a primary education class, even though I was actually going to teach secondary. And they wanted us to put on this document, like an 8x10 paper, just symbols that represent us. Well, as you guys can imagine, I made sure I put the cross on there, and I put it nice and big. So when I showed it to the class, you know, and then these are older kids, you know, these are 25 to 35-year-old kids. We have a little bit of an older students at my college, and I made sure I put a Bible on there. I made sure I put a world on there, enough to where I could point at these symbols and say, I am a Christian. I believe the earth is young. And I offended my entire class to the point where they were emailing my professor that they couldn't work with me. And she told me at the end of the class that she had to change her, how she did her class just to accompany for me. And I was like, are you trying to make me feel bad? Because I really don't feel bad. I was like,
were they all atheists? Or, I mean, do you come across any other Christians? I mean...
None in that class. There was one, I think he may have been a Christian, but this was also a very liberal class too, like on the left side of the political spectrum. And this poor kid, he was like 22, and, you know, he kind of followed me around like a little puppy. I'm not trying to like demean him, but he didn't have anybody else to look up to because everybody else was against him because of his white skin and that he was a male, which is like a double whammy in a very liberal college. And I think he might have could have potentially believed in God, but we never got to that because we had a girl in my class in Salvador. Tony, all of you guys will laugh at this. She called herself in the very beginning of the class. Oh shoot, now I'm forgetting the name. No, two. That's the English name. She's not a male. She's not a female. She's a, what's the middle one?
Oh, she doesn't know what different genders.
No, not a transsexual. It's
non-binary, all that.
Non-binary.
LGBT.
She called herself a non-binary. She was clearly a woman. So I called her a woman. I'm sorry, I'm not going to have compelled speech. And she was so offended by me and the rest of the class, of course, because I wouldn't, you know, and I'm like, no, God made male and female. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like biologically you're male and female, and yeah, it was absolutely terrible. And so I think there may have been one of the Christians, but the rest were all atheists.
Maybe the next time that happens to you, if they say something to you about, you know, you should be a better person. Wait a minute, you're offending me now. I'm not just a person. I'm also a thing, and I'm an it. And so you need to get your you know, you got to get your political correctness right here. I've got to refer to you as a non-binary, but I'm a multi-faced human, and you're not respecting me. I pull some crazy thing on like
Actually, I told them that they should call me a bobcat. That's how I identify.
That's incredible.
It was. It's been pretty terrible. I probably joined the most liberal college in my state, which I didn't know that at first. And they are 100% against Christians, against Adam and Eve, against the literal creation, against the flood. And in fact, you guys are going to find this really interesting. I was in a Nazi Germany class, and I love history. And so I was excited to join this class because I wanted to learn more in depth about Germany during that time. And I had a great, fairly neutral teacher, but he mentioned something in the class that just threw me off. He was like, well, you know, the Jews, they actually do believe in the Messiah, and that's not the reason why they were persecuted. And I'm like, are you kidding us? The reason why they remained in that category is because they don't believe in Isaiah 53. And I said that at my class. He goes, well, but this is new information. You're just thinking about old stuff. And I'm going, wow, this is pervasive. It is through all the classes, all of them, including now attacking that. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. How much this has infiltrated almost all of education to deny any part of Christianity. In fact, I took a intro to Eastern religions class. The second week I was in, Moses didn't write the Old Testament, and we have proof. And he gave his proof. I went and researched it. He was wrong, of course. He didn't believe me. And then how they set it up is that like Hinduism was first. Buddhism is a reaction to Hinduism. That's actually true. I think it's Daoism is first, and then there's another religion that's a reaction to it because of, like, Hinduism was the caste system, and Buddhism is a reaction to it because they didn't like the caste system. They like be stuck in a certain caste, right? Well, that's how they claim Judaism and Christianity. that Christianity is a reaction to Judaism. This is what these kids are being taught now.
Oh yeah, they're
currently.
telling kids this is truth,
And
they
it's
want them
not.
to learn it. It's the devil's work, trying to get them to not believe in their Savior. Yeah.
Exactly. And I tried to tell my teacher, my professor, I was like, Christianity is not a reaction to Judaism. And it's because they get confused because, one, they read the Bible through a filter. They think that Judaism is monotheism and Christianity is polytheism. It's not. The Trinity, not the word, but the implied meaning of a Godhead is actually in the Old Testament, but they're just going to skip over that. And I thought it was very interesting how they lined all those up, and I was like, no wonder people are so confused.
You'll notice if you look at it, the world is very much embracing Hinduism and polytheism right now, a sort of a new agey culture. Atheism is not to the chagrin of all the atheists in the world. Atheism is not growing, and it's not going to overtake the world, and everybody's there won't be any theists anymore. That's not what's happening. What's happening is the world is becoming more and more religious, but it's just not becoming Christian. It's moving towards a new agey sort of religion where everybody is their own God and everybody is God and part of God, a very Hindu-esque sort of religion. And that's what the world's really coming to. And we can see the biblical prophecies in the book of Revelation and Daniel coming true right before our eyes with this, because it's obviously the world is being set up to follow Satan with this. He's deceiving the whole world with this idea, and then he's going to come in and say, I think this is what will happen. He'll say, well, you believed in all these various gods, and all those were me presenting myself to you in different ways. I went to a convenience store recently and for a cup of coffee during my lunch break, and I drove to this convenience store from work, and I went in there, and there was a young Hindu lady working there, and I struck up a conversation. I thought to myself, well, maybe, just maybe, and so I said, do you believe in God? And she said yes, and I said, oh, what God? She said, all of them. All are gods. And I said, okay, so what, you believe the Hindu religion, right? She said, well, she said yes. And I said, well, I'm a Christian. I said, I believe in Jesus Christ. And she said, he's God too. They're all gods. And I'm saying, oh, I get it now. You believe all the gods of all the religions are true. See, what she believed, what she expressed to me was that God presents himself with multiple faces, different masks. He can be Shiva for one people, while he can be Jesus Christ for another, et cetera, et cetera. And those are all the same God presenting himself in different ways to different people. And what I said to her was this: the problem with that is that the biblical God is so exclusive and excludes himself from every other God in the world, and says all those gods are imaginary. None of them are God, but he alone is God, and there is but one God. He is it. And she shook her head. She folded her arms in defiance while she was standing there behind the counter and said, no. She just shook her head. No, that's not true. She's so determined to believe this lie. But here's the crazy thing about that idea is because the theology taught by Christianity is so dramatically different, separate from these other religions like Islam and from Buddhism and Hinduism and whatnot. If what she was believing was true, that all those were God, and he presents himself with these different masks to different peoples of the world, then he's a liar. He couldn't be God anyway, because you cannot say that the God of the Bible is going to tell you, I am this way, and then he's going to tell another people, oh, but I am this way. He's lying to one or both of them, see? And what kind of God would there be if he was a deceiver? But God, the Bible says that he's not a deceiver. He tells the truth. He cannot lie. So that idea it's not even rational. It can't possibly be true. But if you were to tell them that, they would just dismiss it. They would do what she did, fold their arms in defiance and shake their head. No, you don't understand. No, wait a minute. The truth is, you're not understanding. If what you're saying is true, then your idea of God, he's a big fat deceiver. He's lying to everybody by saying he's just this way to the Christians and just this way to the Muslims and just this way to the Hindus. He's a deceiver, a liar. Why would you worship such a God? But if you tell these people that, they won't even consider that. It's like the evolutionist. No, somehow it's true anyway. I'm right. You know, that's what the place they'll go to in their mind. Anything but give up what they believe and discover or believe that God is truly exclusive and has made only one way for man to be with him. That can't be true. Everybody's way has to be the open door, a way to God. That's what the world is moving to today. And it's really, really heavily influenced by Hinduism.
Very much so. And I'll give you guys something kind of interesting to kind of think about and maybe even present to somebody. So let's just take me and you, Nephilim. Let's say that we're both gods, all right? And you are known to be like Zeus, all right? Change your mind, have emotional tantrums, or me. Okay, let's say it's me. It doesn't matter who it is, all right? And then you've got this other god who has never lied, never sinned, always keeps their promises. If we both gave promises, who would you believe? I haven't actually presented that argument to an atheist yet, but I've kind of thought about it, because if you look at all the other gods and every other religion, they all go back on their word at some point.
Of course, they're fickle. The gods of the mythologies of the world are fickle. They fight each other. They have wars with each other.
And they act like humans. They act like humans.
Yes.
But our God does not act like a human. And I'm not sure if that's you guys can tell me, but I think would not be a bad theological argument.
No, and would bring their mind to recognize that there's a problem with what they're believing, but how they'll deal with it, is another story.
How many infinite gods could they have? I mean, infinite would mean one. I mean, you're going to have how many gods that are going to fit in the universe or outside the universe? It's kind of silly when you get into all those Hindu gods. They have a god for, everything.
Actually, that's the Japanese god, which I think is Taoist. They have the little, what is their names? They have like these little spirits for everything. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah.
It's not Buddhism. Buddhism doesn't have a lot of gods, but it's not as much as, is it Taoism? I guess Taoism.
I don't know. Some of the Zen Buddhists are atheists. They're claiming to be atheists now, but they do believe in a soul. Some of them, some sort of reincarnated soul. I don't know. It's tricky.
It is very tricky, because Hinduism actually believed in a soul, and Buddhism does not believe in a soul. They believe in Brahma. Some kind of ultimate thing. I was trying to find my notebook for the past couple of days from my Intro to Eastern Religions class, and I can't find it. But I learned a lot of interesting stuff from it. But sorry, go ahead, Neff.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you had finished. I was going to say an interesting thing about these religions. If you look into it, what you'll find is there's similarities a lot of times in the mythologies of the world, say, for example, Zeus and Thor, they have the same attributes. They're both sky gods. They both deal with thunder and lightning, and you find these similarities. A Mesopotamian god might be the same god that's believed upon by the Slavic people or the Germanic people. They have the same characteristics many times, and there's a reason for that. And another pattern that you'll see is in many mythologies of the world, the story goes that, they're going very deeply into antiquity, is that there was a father of the gods, originally a father of the gods, and a mother of the gods, and they gave birth to a plethora of gods, of course. And there was usually a son of the gods, like the first son that they had, and he got mad at dad and went to war against his father and overthrew his dad to become king of the gods. That theme is found in Japanese mythology, It's found in Nordic mythology, Germanic mythology, Mesopotamian mythology, African mythology. I looked into this. I researched this for a couple of months, and I found that pattern exists in various religions across the globe. Not all, many, but a dozen prominent ones. And I think there's a powerful explanation for that. What do we read? What did Satan say in the Old Testament? When didn't Satan say, "I will be like the Most High. I will sit on the sides of the north and the south, and he will be like the Most High." So Satan has always wanted to take God's place in the mind of man. He's been doing that ever since, right? And so it's very much like this idea of the son of the gods overthrowing his father to become king of the gods. Where'd that idea come from? So that's an interesting thing. And you'll also find that that many of the gods they're exactly the same, as I pointed out, in one religion or another. Now here's I think two explanations for why man came up with all these various mythologies of gods long ago, within the first couple of centuries, several centuries after the flood, after the Tower of Babel affair. Is I think these are two explanations. Some of you might disagree with me, but this is what I currently believe. I believe one of them is because of ancestor worship. For example, Ham, the Bible tells us Ham migrated to Africa, and the oldest historical name we have for Egypt is Hamia, and the god they had there was Hamet. So what they did is they deified Ham. Right, they turned him into a god. That's happened a number of times. But also, doesn't the Bible tell us that the sons of God kept not their estate in Jude 1 and Genesis, and they came into this world and did dastardly things, taught man the arts and sciences, disrupted God's order of creation, and so ancient. Imagine yourself as an ancient human being. It's been 2 centuries since the Tower of Babel affair. You're living in animal skins and using stones for tools because you're not one of those people who remember how to make fire like some of the people at the Tower of Babel did. You had to start from scratch all over again. And you're living in this tribe somewhere on the earth where you've migrated away from Babel, and you see these angelic beings. What are you going to believe they are if you weren't told the truth at Babel, because your people rejected what Shem and them were preaching at the Tower of Babel, the son of Noah, Shem, and Japhet and Ham, and you didn't get that story, or you rejected it, right? And you've already forgotten about the one true God, and you go off migrating with your large family group, and there's 2,000 of you now, or 1,000, and here comes these beings from the sky. What are you going to believe they are? Especially if they tell you, "I am your God." You're going to believe them. If they can show supernatural power, they'll make you believe that. I think that happened a number of times in the earth, and that explains part of the reason for these various mythologies in the world. Men actually believed that these things were God because they saw them do supernatural things, I think, and because of deification of certain ancient patriarchs found in the Bible.
I actually find it kind of interesting. Have you looked up the mystery religion of Babylon?
I haven't, not too much. I mean, I've studied somewhat the gods of Babylon and the gods of Acadia, very similar, and many of those gods are the same gods, just like as I was pointing out.
Yeah, so the mystery religion of Babylon has a couple of interpretations. One can actually be taken from Hinduism, the mark of Cain, the tikala that the Hindus put on their forehead could be attributed to the same mark that Cain had, because God marked him so that way no one would kill him. And Hinduism has no roots. What they say, because they have no proof in ancient history of Hinduism, is that, it was a cultural thing and it just kind of arose, and but the oldest text that they have for Hinduism is about 1000 BC. Well, I've watched a lot of other videos that talk about the Tower of Babel, Nimrod and his wife, which is actually his mother, and how this 3-god cult kind of arose, which would be the son of God, the moon goddess, and the son of God. And you can actually see that reflected in a lot of religions.
Yeah.
So I would say that there's probably a lot more in-depth stuff when it comes to that, because what Nimrod was doing was a huge and complete violation against God. Well, of course, his father Cush was the one that started it, and this started a cult that eventually spread out into a bunch of other stuff like Hinduism, Buddhism, a lot of other religions that come out. And a lot of these religions, they can't even say that the Buddha actually existed. They think maybe potentially, but the Vedic texts that actually mention him are 300 years after his death, meaning no one alive that wrote the Vedic texts about the Buddha, not the Hinduism texts. No one was alive that even met him, and they have no preceding text, meaning there is no, what did that one guy call it? I was in that debate that I had with RJ. Provenance. There's provenance, I think is the word, meaning there is no like paper trail coming from this mysterious Buddha all the way to the Vedic texts that are written. But yet the Buddha and all the Vedic texts actually mirror Hinduism, Taoism. They mirror a lot of religions and the Mystery of Babylon religion.
Hey guys, I'm just gonna get some. Yeah, I'm just going to cut off. I'm going to go to bed. But Jesse, keep sticking up for yourself and stick up for yourself against those professors, you know.
I will, Tony. Thank you so much. I probably should be graduating in December if I have no more problems. But hey, it was nice meeting you.
Yeah, if I see you in the chat, I'll chat with you. God bless everybody. Good night, Neff. Good talking to you guys. Sal, everybody. Have a good night.
God bless.
Take care, bro.
Good night.
That's a fascinating subject, Jesse. I've always thought it was fascinating, the diversification of religions in the early centuries after the Tower of Babel affair is a very fascinating subject, and it's very difficult to discern exactly what happened that led to this. You know, it can be, but you can recognize certain patterns, and those patterns can be very
pattern of the ziggurats all across the world, and it's very fascinating. Well, it's the same thing with religion. Well, how is it that we have such a common memory? Oh, it's because we have a common descent.
Snake cults too.
Yeah,
snake
exactly.
cults are all over the world in ancient religions, all over the world. Snake cults.
Yeah, but it's more than just snakes, though. It's so much more than that. I mean, if you look at all of them, like the Inuits have not had contact with people for, I think it was like 800 or 1,000 years or something like that, and yet they have dragon statues. Where'd they get that?
Yeah, giants too. The Inuits have legends of giants that they said were so great that they could run across a field and snatch a bison up and throw him over their shoulder and keep running. Of course, that's probably an exaggeration. Exaggeration happens, but it's obvious that they're talking about men of extraordinary size. So this is just one more of the legends of giants that exist in the various cultures of the world.
Well, and also if you think about it, if they all come from a common memory, then you would see a commonality through our entire civilization, right? You've got Noah, his 3 sons, his wife, and his 3 daughter-in-laws, right?
Yes.
So we would come from a common sense. Like even right now, the passing over the Beringia, which is the land bridge, is being questioned because they're finding sites in South America that are older than the sites in North America. Well, if we look at the Bible, Noah was able to build this gigantic ark, right? Whether you believe that he was 12 or 13 feet tall or, a regular man size today, doesn't matter. The ark was still big. The ark that was created in where did ICR create the ark in Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that one has the capacity of 48 40-foot semi-trailers. That's huge. Now, if Noah was bigger, taller, like 12 feet tall, okay, the ark would be much bigger. If he had that kind of technology to build that kind of ark, that means that people, as soon as they left the Tower of Babel and as soon as the Ice Age abated, they would have traveled across the ocean from Africa. They would have traveled across the ocean from the other islands on the west side of the Americas. And now
Sure.
evolutionists are very confused because they can't have boats that long ago. That's too complicated.
Yeah, man had good technology early on. Man has always been smart, you know, and even smarter in the past than we are today. Less technology in many ways, but just as smart, maybe more intelligent. Mutations are probably reducing our intelligence. Adam probably had the genius he was probably far superior to Einstein, you know, and look at us today.
Yeah, they actually, I can't link it because I can't remember which one it is, but it's on Answers in Genesis, and I believe the title of the article is "What Were Post-Flood People Like?" Pliny, there are two Plinys. They don't actually say which one it is, whether it's the elder or the younger, but it doesn't really matter because the younger is actually the nephew of the older. It doesn't actually really matter which Pliny it is. And Pliny records that there was a man that lived during the age of the Spartans that could see for 126 miles from the island of Sicily all the way into the Bay of Carthage. And I looked it up. Now, of course, Google Maps was telling me it was like 145 miles because it had to go to another bay around the corner, but there's a pinnacle up on that southern part of the bay, and you can look at it on Google Maps. He could see for 126
Of the earth, though.
He was on a, what's it called? Not a pinnacle. What's it called? A high hill. What's the name of it?
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about? Basically, he was up on a hill. And I have heard that about the curvature of the earth, and I'm not sure about the argument against that.
It may be an exaggeration, but nonetheless, the point of it is that that he was capable of seeing far further than a human being today would be able to, because of, I guess, the degeneration of our eyes.
Oh, it absolutely is. Like Pliny mentions another guy that had a 500-pound breastplate, which I was in the military, and my SAPI plates were 30 pounds, and that was heavy.
Oh, yeah.
No, granted, I'm pretty small. But hold on. I'm not even done. Hold on. He had a 500-pound breastplate, and he had 200-pound shod foot plates. And he could climb up a ladder.
Wow. That's strong, man.
Yeah, but we are losing that because we're degenerating.
Absolutely.
And Pliny, and I'll give you an example of how long Pliny lived ago. Pliny lived about 60 AD. I think it's 60 to 90 AD. One of the two, either the elder or the younger. That's 2,000 years ago.
I did a lot of research into something very similar. I lost the information because the hard drive in my computer failed, and I lost the text, but I had done the calculations. I studied the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I read it, and in that story, Gilgamesh goes with his best friend Enkidu to go fight the bull of Bashan, or not Bashan, some bull, I've forgotten the name of it. Anyway, in a forest, and slay it, right? And then eventually Enkidu gets killed and put in the underworld, and Gilgamesh goes after, takes the ferryman to get to the underworld to try to retrieve his best friend, who he loved very much. But it describes the two of them, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, packing up all their war gear and getting ready to go do battle with this bull, a giant bull in the forest. And it describes in ancient Babylonian measures what the weight of their breast shields were, and of their shields and their armor, their chainmail, and their and even describes how far they traveled in a day's time of walking. Now, I did the math. I looked it up, and I looked up what were these ancient Babylonian measures. Do we have archaeological record of them? And it turns out we do. We know exactly what these ancient Babylonian measures were, because these measures have been preserved archaeologically. They've been discovered, so we know what they were. So I found out what the measure of those was, and I turned that into, so I could understand it better, into English feet, inches, and pounds, right? And guess what I found out? According to the story of the Babylonians, Gilgamesh and Enkidu were carrying just very similar to what you said, 500 pounds worth of gear with them. That's what it would have weighed using the ancient Babylonian measure. 500 pounds worth of stuff, including their chainmail, their shield, their sword, would have weighed together 500 pounds. Now, the distance that these men traveled, they gave that measure in Babylonian measures too, in their walking to the forest, and it took them a day's time. I think it was 1 day. I'm not sure, but anyway, I did the math, okay, and I figured out the stride, how long this was, and the time it takes, and how many strides a man makes in an hour, that kind of thing. I did all this math, and guess what I found out? The stride of these men was 8 feet. Every time they stepped, 8-foot stride. They would have had to have had that stride to make it there in that amount of time. So what kind of man can carry 500 pounds worth of stuff while walking and still walk 500 miles and do it in X amount of time while taking 8-foot strides? That's a man that's 12 or 14 feet tall, you know.
Well, and I'll tell this just for the audience really fast. So I was in the military, and our gear weighs about, so our packs weigh about 75 pounds. And depending on the size of you, meaning the size of your chest and all that kind of stuff, whether you're tall and all that kind of stuff, you're going to add between 30 to 55 pounds to that. That's nothing. It's nothing compared to what those men carry. I just want to throw that out there.
Right. It makes you wonder just how much truth there is in it, how much exaggeration. But I think the bottom line is that it's off. If we were to take the size of the men as a reflection of what they were able to carry and what they did, they would have had to have been enormous men, no matter how much exaggeration was involved. Nonetheless, kind of a crazy stuff we're talking about. Salvador's over here wondering.
We're talking about genetics.
No, actually, I was, even though I would be a little skeptical of ancient records outside of the Bible, there's some interesting article by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that said our bones were so much stronger 7,000 years ago because they found bones of people that were about 7,000 years ago, and they were very much stronger. They were as strong as an orangutan. And so there's been an interesting trend. This is what's really funny. I was reading this. They have to put a spin on it that's evolutionary. They're saying, well, the reason our bone strength is lighter now is we're not as physically active.
Oh, yeah. And
then some pointed out, they said, well, there's a problem here because the people that had these very strong bones were foragers. They were not farmers. And the bone mass, they said the average person would be like a CrossFit. The average person would be an elite CrossFit athlete of today. And I've been looking for this article, and because I thought, I'd only seen it like in a tabloid publication up until today. And so when you're talking about this, I began looking at it, and I said, this is very interesting. So people 6,000, 10,000 years ago, they had much stronger bones, which implied their muscles were also very strong. Mm-hmm. And their cranial capacity was substantially bigger than ours. So they're probably way more intelligent. So just like, and they're wondering, why have we degenerated so quickly in these, 6,000, 7,000 years?
And they have to try to answer
we know
for
this.
it. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Neff. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, and it's funny that they try to answer for it, because it's not like all of us were big and giants and all that kind of stuff. Like the one that Pliny describes about with the breastplate and and they're actually, they were stone. They weren't even iron. They were stone. He was stone shod boots and stone shod or stone breastplate or whatever. And he was not a big man, but he was strong. And if you look at people today that do powerlifting competitions, do they have thin bones? No, they have thick bones. They're very thick men. I mean, they have big bones, they have big hands, they have big shoulders, and it's because they have that kind of structure. And if you think about people back in the day, they more than likely had those kind of structures, thick bones, and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't necessarily have to be tall, but look at Neanderthals. they were confused for the longest time about how thick their bones were. Well, it makes sense. One, I think, is because they were able to have a much greater age, because I think it was Shem that lived 500 years after the flood, correct? He lived to be 600, right?
He could have known Abraham. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but he lived to be 600 because he was 100. Yeah, he was
years.
100 at the flood and lived to be 600. So I would think genetically, and Salvador, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but genetically their bones would have to be thicker, and they more than likely would be stronger, just genetically.
Yeah,
well, it's, unfortunately we don't have access to quality gene sequences, and besides, a lot of inheritance is not purely DNA, and we're learning that, but something's degraded, and people are just not wanting to come to terms with what it means. They have to put a spin on it, because it's rather obvious that we were so much more capable. Because I'll tell you why this is just kind of repeating what a lot of people in the creationist community are saying, is if we're degenerating this fast, there's no way we could have evolved. Even
Right.
evolutionary biologists realized it.
That's right. And the human foot tracks found in the same strata with dinosaur foot tracks at Biloxi, Texas, if those are in fact human footprints, I believe they are. They look human. The stride on those, you should take a look at the pictures and see what the stride of that guy was. He wasn't normal. It wasn't like a normal man today. It was a very big stride. You have to try very hard to try to make your feet fit into those footsteps a normal sized man today, because it's a very big stride. If those are human footprints, the guy that made them was very big. He was bigger than a typical man. The shoe size is like 16 or something, or 18, and the stride is the length of a normal is 5 to 6 feet long. I mean, how tall do you have to be to make a 5, 6, 7 foot stride? I'd say you have to be at least 8 foot something, 9 feet tall.
Well, but if animals were that big back then how come we couldn't be bigger?
I mean, the cutting guys, but we've been on since like 9. I think SFT needs to get a break. So.
Okay, thanks.
We've been on for 2 hours.
Yeah, it's been a great discussion. That was really neat about Nephilim. Yeah, those are interesting.
We'll do this again.
Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, it's good hanging out with you.
Good.
Everybody have a great evening.
Same to you now.
Unless SFT wants to say something here, I'll just probably cut it off.
Yeah, I would. He's probably sleeping. Thank you, Salvador. Good talking to you again. And Nephilim, Jason. And Craig, thank you.
Likewise, guys. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.